health care. After 100 years, we tried for 100 years to get health care. And now we have it. Not everything everybody wants it, but the current plan, 32 million more Americans that don't have health care would have it under this plan. And here, the first thing that this new group in control of the General Assembly passes is not something to help us get more jobs, but something to undermine health care. That concerns us. 27% of African Americans in this state without health care insurance. 1/3 of North Carolinians in North Carolina right now who can't afford affordable housing.
Say it, Reverend.
Over 20% of North Carolinians in poverty.
Say it, Reverend.
Why would the General Assembly be undercutting health care reform? And so this is no time for complacency. And we must march on Raleigh and declare forward together.
Not one step back. Yes,
we see the resegregation of our public schools, not just in Wake County, but across the state, but exacerbated in Wake County. A system of socioeconomic diversity and achievement that was put in place that worked, that made Wake County one of the top school systems in this nation. 70 other school systems in this nation modeled after. Gary Orfield, in his book, Why There Are No Bad Schools in Wake County, Hope and Despair in American Cities, in 2009 touted it as a model for the nation. And in 2010, 5 ultra-conservative Tea Party-backed voucher-supporting Republican school board members took office, and on their first vote in office, with no research, with no plan to replace the plan, with no consideration of how it would exacerbate racially identifiable high poverty schools, voted to end a plan that blacks and whites put in place in 2000. And within 4 years, by 2004, it was touted in the New York Times and all over this nation. And black performance of children went up 40% in just in 4 years. A system that at one time, under the leadership of an African American who became National Superintendent of the Year, boasted of 81% of its students performing at or above grade level.
All right.
And we've got a crowd now that's trying to argue that diversity is the enemy of student achievement, when 99% of the research for the last 60 years said that diversity is a key component of student achievement and equitable resources. That's why we have to say forward together.
Not one step back.
Then in the General Assembly, they're talking about the way to close the $5.7 billion budget is to cut education, cut money from preschools. Just yesterday, dropout prevention programs. Just yesterday, there was a discussion in the Senate to lift the cap on charter schools, which would undermine funding for public schools.
That's right.
But not only just lift the cap on charter schools, they're also discussing removing the clause that currently exists that says you can't use money for charter schools in ways that resegregate schools. So in essence, what they want to do is resurrect the Pearsall plan of the 1950s, when in this state, as a way of not complying with Brown, this state said to people, if you don't want to go to public schools that are integrated, you can take public money and start private schools. That's the Pearsall plan. That's our Beverly Lake.
Yes. That's right.
And when we see now this move to lift the ban on charter schools and not demand that even if you create a charter school, it can't be a resegregated school, we see that people are trying to find all the ways they can to have high poverty, racially identifiable schools for some children and private schools with public dollars for other children. And because of that, this is no time for complacency, and we must march on Raleigh and say forward together, not one step back. When we see tax cuts to the wealthy and discussions about tax cuts to the wealthy, while we still in this state undermine labor rights, when we see discussions about a cuts-only approach to budget, cut education, cut preschool, cut, without developing a 21st century tax code, without closing corporate loopholes, without making sure that the top 20% pay their fair share, those that are able to pay their fair share. And we know that if you can't cut your way out of $5.7 billion. And if you underfund education and cut health care and destroy the Office of Minority Health and undercut critical services to the poor, then you actually will end up balancing the budget on the backs of the poor, which is not only financially wrong and fiscally wrong, it's morally wrong.
Amen. Say so. Say
It's
so.
morally wrong.
Say so.
And that is why this is no time for complacency. And we must march on Raleigh and say forward together.
Not one step back.
We're in a time when we have members of the General Assembly talking about repealing the Racial Justice Act that we just passed, that says if a person can prove that race was used in the application of the death penalty, that they can get life without the possibility of parole. Who doesn't believe in racial justice? Think about that. We have people wanting to repeal racial justice. That doesn't even sound right. That somebody would want to repeal racial justice. That somebody says, I want to vote against racial justice. In a community, in a country, in a state founded on constitutional principles all about justice. We have those in our state that want to ignore the Swecker report. Some of you saw it on CNN the other night. The Swecker report, where the state investigated its own self and found that in one of its SBI labs since '87, 269 cases, tainted evidence was used, bad science was used, lying on the stand by state officials was used to convict people. 3 of those persons have been killed. 4 are still on death row. Most of them are poor and black. And we don't even know how many other people's cases where tainted evidence and bad science was used to convict them, because there are 5 other labs and only 1 has been investigated. We don't know since 1976 how much of this bad science was used. 1976 is the date when the death penalty was reinstituted. We don't know. We don't know how many people plea bargained because somebody walked in with bad science and told them you're guilty, when in reality it was ketchup and not blood. We don't know. And the state had a policy of lying, perjuring itself on the stand. And there are some that want to ignore that. And then right in this city, again, they want to violate fundamental civil rights protection. You can't just fire people because you don't like them. You can't just fire people because they're black. You can't intimidate people on the job.
Say so.
Run them off their job. There are laws against those kinds of things. And because that is happening, we understand this is no time for complacency. And we must march on Raleigh and declare forward together, not one step back. So we're marching and we're calling young people and old people and middle-aged people and blacks and Latinos and white and people of all races and all religions to march on Raleigh February the 12th, starting at Estate Hall at Shaw University. And what we are marching for is educational equality, economic justice, good jobs, workers' rights, and a fair budget that doesn't balance the budget on the backs of the poor, and equal protection under the law. That is why we're gathering. We believe finally that we are at, Reverend Nelson, at the intersection of history. History is made at the intersection. And we are at a time where the issue for us is not what we're going to compromise on, but what we're going to stand on. The issue is, are we going to allow this state, this country, to regress to the politics of yesterday, where people can pander to fear and prejudice in order to hold political power, or whether we're going to push to the politics of tomorrow and the politics of hope and the politics of moving this nation forward. We can't go back